The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical psychology for today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, narrated by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. On this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from The Natives Are Restless by Idries Shah. 3. The Natives Are Restless. Free or unfree? It is the freedom to think which has made such excellent books blossom forth amongst the English. Voltaire, Reflections for Fools. This soul's prison we call England. George Bernard Shaw, Heartbreak House. His name was Isa bin Abdullah al-Nazrani, and that was the cause of the trouble. People who know the Middle East will immediately divine that he was a Christian. Jesus, son of the servant of God, a Nazarene, is, after all, what his name means. But in England he was tired of being treated like an infidel, or asked how many wives he had, where he had left his camel, and whether he was a real sheikh. Isa was from Lebanon, and proud of it. Nothing wrong with that, but whenever he visited England the natives became restless because he was giving off the wrong signals. So, informed, or misinformed, that I was an expert, he came to me. I quizzed him sternly. Do you touch people when talking to them? Do you eat garlic? Laugh immoderately or not at all? Look straight into people's eyes? Still wear winkle-picker shoes or wide-bottomed trousers? But however much I probed, his answers were always no. True, he was small and of Phoenician appearance, but so are many Cornishmen, I assured him. He spoke English tolerably well, and people hearing him talk sometimes said things like, "Don't tell me, I know, you're from Derbyshire." So that was all right. In the end, we decided that his cover was so regularly blown in England because he lacked the magic symbols which prevent people from digging deeper. When people said, for instance, "Where do you come from?" he recoiled from saying, "I've been in jail," as many English people would do, by way of jocular reproof at such inquisitiveness. And, of course, if asked his name, that only started the usual questions. He had, in a word, no status in the eyes of the local tribe. Very well, there was only one thing, or only one long string of things, to be done. Isa had to make a number of complete changes: nationality, name, appearance, qualifications, the lot. He bought appropriate clothes at Home Brothers and eschewed day-glow bow ties. That part of it was not easy for him because these ties were the latest thing in Beirut at the time. Now for the more difficult stuff. He moved from Kensington, because too many Arabs live there, and shunned Bayswater and St. John's Wood for similar reasons. He took a small flat in Plumstead. Solid, unfashionable, English. A week or two later he came back to me. "My friend, I need your help. Come with me to the lawyer who is collecting information for my official Anglification." Although I remembered the wise Afghan saying, "A mouse pelt will never cover a drum," how could I help with official matters? I went with him to give moral support. The lawyer, at £100 an hour, was Mr. Simon ap Starman, in a good way of business near one of the Inns of Court, and highly recommended for this kind of thing. When we were seated in his panelled office, he explained that it would be a good idea if Mr. Nazrani were to apply for British nationality as a citizen of the United Kingdom and Colonies under the Nationality Acts, which he then read out in considerable detail. I am sure that, though he must have known the word filibustering, as an honourable man he did not have one eye on the clock. "Of course," he said, after looking with approval at Nazrani's English clothes, "it is not easy. I suggest you do all you can to accumulate, shall we say, superficial plausibility." Which means, Nazrani was eager and, although rich, not unaware of that meter ticking. Far be it from me to suggest that appearances are everything, or indeed anything, in the eyes of officials in this country, said Mr. Ap Starman, though it took him longer to say it than it does to read. Let alone those at the Home Office, but we can't be too careful. He suggested, in short, that Mr. Nasrani might, after this little preliminary talk, thank you, that will be £200 in cash, go away and collect supporting facts which might, after appropriate verification by Mr. Ap Starman, help to fill out his dossier for the Home Office. So we did. By that I mean Nasrani did. He spent the next few weeks reading the newspapers and talking to all the English people of repute whom he could find, to see what characteristics and other items they had which he might acquire. One or two other Lebanese, some of them wise in these matters, chipped in with ideas at many a brainstorming session at their favourite restaurant. Finally, I was once more called in to advise. Some of the ideas were unfamiliar, others downright potty. Now, said Nasrani as we devoured halva at the counter of the Phoenicia Rama kebab takeaway, now tell me how to buy an Oxford University Master of Arts degree. Non-starter, I told him. But it is true that the MA is sold by Oxford for a sum of money. In the Lebanon, an Oxford MA is something. It must be something too in England. I paid a man from Sidon a large sum for the information that you simply buy the degree. Do you deny that it is bought and sold? Yes and no, Nasrani. How can you have yes and no? You can in England. You see, Oxford University does bestow the MA, with little or no formality, on people for money. Ha! But only if they already have the Oxford BA, Bachelor of Arts degree. Ridiculous, he hissed. But when I insisted that this was a fact, he accepted it with Eastern fatalism. Very well, I shall get the BA after my naturalization. It will help me to pass among the masses. Not just among the masses, I assured him. But what else do you want to check out? Nasrani looked at his notes. I have to change my name. Nothing easier, I said. What or who would you like to be? I would like to be John Smith. Too obvious, I said. All burglars give that name to the police, and it is often used for dubious purposes when registering at hotels. I am not a burglar and do not intend to stay at hotels, he shouted. But I skillfully interrupted him with a Middle Eastern gesture which means, you never know your fate, and he subsided. In any case, I continued, in England you can change your name by deed poll, but you can't change the part they call your Christian name by law. Christian name? All my name is Christian. I'm a member in good standing of the United True Catholic Essentialists. I mean your forename. Why? I'm not quite sure, but someone once told me that it is something to do with baptism. The name was given in a religious ceremony, and so it's sort of holy. You can't put it asunder type of thing. You are not joking with me? No, Nasrani, honest. Then these English are pagans at heart, to treat me, a Christian, thus. Never mind, I said hastily, because I thought that Near Eastern sectarianism would not help his cause one whit. You are a Christian, and Isa isn't too bad. People will think it is like Asa, which they do use here. Just don't translate it, that's all. Not translate it? That would be blasphemy. Why, I've got a good friend called Jesus Cristo. I am sure you have, but he must be Spanish or Latin American. They don't use that name here. Think what you like about it. It was time to bring up what the English call heavy guns. Documentation. Sometimes they call it chapter and verse. There is an English writer, I told Nasrani, called A.G. Gardner. He was a great expert on England and wrote a valuable book called Prophets, Priests and Kings. In it there is a cautionary tale about how you can actually be ruined in England by having the wrong kind of name. Nasrani leant forward. I must know this, and at once, he muttered. I am trying to tell you. In fact, I shall give you the full authoritative text." I took him back to my place and read the passage out to him. When Mr. A.C. Morton rose upon the firmament in Parliament, he seemed to have a prosperous future before him. But one day a malevolent pressman in the gallery discovered that A.C. stood for Alpheus Cleophas. He published the fact to the world, and Mr. Morton never recovered from the blow. He vanished in derisive laughter. His fate was sealed at the font. Nasrani let out a long sigh of relief. "I understand, but I have collected better names from reputable sources and may adopt one of those. How about Bartholomew Cholmondeley? Nigel Bartholomew Cholmondeley is the hero of a very English novel I bought recently." "Subject to two things," I said, relishing my role as advisor now that something I really knew about had come up. "And they are?" He looked at me like Hercule Poirot. "They are, first, you must be able to pronounce it properly, otherwise you'll be rumbled for sure." I paused. "You write it Cholmondeley, but you must always pronounce it Chumley, or better still, Chumley. You know, the sort of thing, just as Featherstone Haw is always to be pronounced Fanshawe." He practiced it several times and nodded with pleasure. "It sounds good. Very English. Chum means friend, of course, though in Turkish Chumli would mean the man from Chum." "Be that as it may," I told him, "there is a further problem." "And that is the Bartholomew? You pronounce that Bew, I suppose?" "No, you do not. You pronounce it Bartholomew. Bartholomew Chumley. I was about to speak of the hyphen." "But the hyphen is very aristocratic." "As a matter of fact, it is not. I have researched this," I said primly, because I had. "And you have to be careful with hyphens." I then gave him a rundown on the matter, stressing that the origin of some hyphenated names in England was when the father of an heiress, having no male issue, had demanded that some possibly fortune-hunting would-be husband couple his surname with hers as a condition of agreeing to the marriage. "The result is," I continued, "that lots of people, especially those in the upper class who lack hyphens, look down on the hyphenated ones as Johnny's come lately. Indeed, Tim Heald's Networks lists, in 1983, 500 surnames of the major families of England and Wales, showing that only 24 of the names, less than 5%, are hyphenated. That means that you would, if hyphenated, have to confine yourself to certain sections of the community. You'd have to shun the upper class and the aristocracy like the plague, Chumley." He thought he understood, or he said that he thought that he understood, so we left that matter. Now he had a name and might get a degree. "Next question?" "I'd like an English title." "You can't have one." "But I want one." "Too difficult." "All right then," he said sulkily. "I'll have a foreign one." "I don't know about that," I said guardedly. But Issa knew better. He'd made enquiries, and that was how we found ourselves in the office of a certain title broker not 100 miles from Piccadilly. Naturally, I had prepared Issa for various eventualities by making him memorize an appropriate quotation. It was from Ralph Waldo Emerson's English Traits. "Everything English is a fusion of distant and antagonistic elements. Nothing can be praised in it without damning exceptions, and nothing denounced without salvos of cordial praise." Even if we were to negotiate for a foreign title, we would have to deal with an Englishman in the matter. A Norman-descended one, of course. 4. "It's those damned drums again, Issa." What a title can do. English people may be rank-conscious, but most of them simply do not understand titles. Someone took advantage of this to get a dig at Lampson, the British ambassador in Cairo, whom nobody liked. Lampson had just become Lord Killern, and a colleague introduced an English lady to him under his new title, guessing what would happen. Sure enough, she gushed, "How wonderful to have you here, Lord Killen. Thank goodness they've got rid of that dreadful man Lampson." Sir William Fraser Tytler, British Minister in Kabul. As we made our way to the glass and concrete building of the kind called Prestige Designed, where the title broker had his office, I couldn't help reflecting on the ironies of fate and the peculiarities of man. Isa bin Abdullah wanted a handle to his name, yet only a month before an Afghan prince had arrived on my doorstep waving a passport which described him only as Mr. Kissing it in ecstasy, he had cried, "Free at last! Hotels will not overcharge me now. People will leave me alone. Oh, blessed Mister!" And there had been the time when, being interviewed in London as the prospective leasee of a house, I had been asked whether I knew anyone with a title. The trustees, you see, might be favourably inclined towards someone who could find referees of some consequence, say a lord or two, something of that sort. That, in turn, reminded me of the time when a detective had come to question me about a missing parcel, supposedly delivered to my address. I had written a letter stating that it had never been received. The police officer had said, "Well, we had a letter from a knob, the Syed Idries Shah, saying that he hasn't seen it. Well, that lets him out. Now what about you?" To hell with the trustees, and with the lovely house that I had set my heart on, I thought, as my attention came back to the agent, who was saying, "Well?" "The only titled people I know in this country," I snapped, "would sign anything for a fiver. Is that what your trustees want?" He smiled as he showed me to the door. Had I won or lost? 2 days later I got his letter. I had been granted the lease. And now I was edging into the world of titles again. A title broker, according to the man in the plush office where we now sat, was someone who brought unwanted titles and title wanters together for mutual satisfaction. If I had been inclined to wince at the way in which this was put, I was quickly reassured by the aspect and manner of the tall, distinguished and wholesome-looking man who sat facing Abdullah and me, at an undoubtedly authentic antique oaken desk. His greying hair was neatly brushed, his jowls a trifle full from good eating. His patrician forehead was unlined, and his horn-rimmed glasses sat upon his prominent nose with just the right assurance. His name was Walter de Blanchemain Fitzgilbert. It said so on his visiting card. "I have been trying to buy the degree of M.A., said Abdullah, "but my friend Shah here says that this is not possible." He indicated me with a wave of his podgy hand, which made my hair bristle even more than did the words. I could not let him get away with that. "If I may interrupt you, Mr. Abdullah," I said, "I must remind you that I am an Easterner too. Your attempt at disparagement, implying that this gentleman can somehow outdo me, is a familiar gambit in the Levant. It will not work here." Fitzgilbert held up his hands, palms towards us. "Now, come, gentlemen," he said in a suitably deep, rich voice. "This will not do. First, let us dispose of the academic titles part, and then we can get on to the interesting bits. You are both right. You can buy some degrees, but not all. There is no law in England, either, preventing you from using an M.A. obtained from a degree mill, usually run by a man with an accommodation address, who just grinds them out. But such a piece of paper will cost you anything from £50 to £500, and will not be worth any more than if you had printed it yourself, which would cost, at most, about £5. "Then perhaps I could become a professor?" asked the Beirusian, still, for some reason, probably the desire for respectability or the powerful influence of the prestigeful American University of Beirut, pushing the academic idea. "Professor," said Mr. Fitzgilbert, "is a title which is at a strange point in its career. 2 world wars have wreaked havoc. Formerly, everyone was intimidated by German professors, but then everything German fell into disrepute, and with it professors, up to a point. He paused and looked at the ceiling. So, in Anglo-Saxon countries, professors have almost become figures of fun. Seaside Punch and Judy shows are traditionally operated by professors. In Latin countries, of course, professor simply means a schoolteacher or a teacher of anything, and you know what status such people have. In spite of myself, and feeling that the slumping figure of Isa bin Abdullah needed some support, I chimed in. I say, I've been a professor myself. I flew from England to give my lectures, and I was on the front page of a newspaper with a photograph with the headline, Professor Commutes to Geneva. Hardly had I the time to shoot him a look of triumph when he trumped me. Yes, exactly, you see what I mean, don't you? He shot his cuffs. Most people in positions of power or authority in this country never attended any university. That's what foreigners can't understand. Continentals and underdeveloped people almost worship higher education. It's only useful, on the whole, for scientists and civil servants here, and they don't have the highest ranking. Did Shakespeare, Churchill, or our own dear Queen ever go to a university or become professors? Fitzgilbert was warming to what was evidently a favourite theme. Why should anyone want to be a professor? Professors usually study what people, Milton, Napoleon, Sir Isaac Newton, said, who never went near a university, let alone becoming professors. Have you never heard the remark, he was intelligent enough to get into a university, but not intelligent enough to see that it was a waste of time? He went on. If you gentlemen want to know how the English feel about professors, I may refer you to the humbug lines of Dean Mansell. With a ceaseless bug, 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 and endless hum, 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 behold the great professors come. Professors we from over the sea, from the land where professors in plenty be. And you may care to see this news item, which is quite recent. He opened a drawer in the desk and took out a bunch of cuttings. The one he selected, and gave us a photocopy each, was marked The Guardian, 17th of May 1977, page 1, column 1. It said, Professors earn less than students they teach. Professors at Britain's leading music colleges receive lower rates of pay than their students charge when giving private lessons to eke out their grants. Isa and I looked at one another aghast. You mean that they half learn something and then teach it at a profit? I stumbled out. And earn more than their professors in the process? Hole in one, said Fitzgilbert. Of course, it is traditional that all kinds of mere musicians are called professor. You know the kind of thing, take it away, professor. I thought he was exaggerating and made a mental note to check this out. Later, I looked up its possibilities in my trusty chambers. Professor, assumed often by mountebanks, quacks, dancing masters, etc. But that was later. Now, Isa, in his frustration at the strange atmosphere where no bargaining seemed possible, jumped up. What do you mean, mere musicians? I'll have you know that I'm a registered patron of the Eastern Mediterranean Song and Dance League. It may be all right where you come from, said Mr. Fitzgilbert, but we English are not all that sold on music, actually. Quite a minority interest over here. Of course, the Continentals think music important, so they berate us for not bothering too much about it. Isa looked sullen. I, on the other hand, smelt a piece of information from my researches into the English. I said, Have you a reference to cover that? I'm a bit of an admirer of Heinrich Heine, you know, Fitzgilbert said, and you'll find these words in his works. Always remembered them, must be 20 years now. These people have no ear, either for rhythm or music, and their unnatural passion for pianoforte playing and singing is thus all the more repulsive. There is nothing on earth more terrible than English music, except English painting. Fitzgilbert gave us the faint but positive look of triumph you see on the face of the Englishman who has prevailed. "All right," said Issa. "Let's get on to the interesting bit you were talking about." The title broker smiled. "That's better. Now, first of all, you must understand that continental titles are generally considered more valid than English ones, elsewhere in the British-influenced world, that is. That's only abroad, so it does not count much. There are good reasons for this. Titles such as baronet were actually invented here as a means of raising money by King James in 1611, and that devalued titles a great deal. Second, people have been ennobled for all kinds of things, like giving money to political parties. The honours here do not have the genealogical continuity of the European ones." I knew that, I told him, still feeling sour about the professor business. Because in our part of the world, the authorities who interest themselves in such things point out that both British and continental titles are very junior, in their estimation, to the Eastern ones. He did not like that. I'd overdone it, and he glared at me. "Only quoting," I said hurriedly. "Quite. Well now, if you want an English title, it will take a great deal of time and effort and so on. Continental ones are better organised. I can offer the following. Dukedom, £250,000. Marquisate, £100,000. Barony, £10,000. He had it by heart, and looked at us, now beaming like a man who has brought good news. Issa whispered to me, "Those are only his negotiating prices. I'm sure we can do better." I said, "Tell us a little more and we'll think it over and come back to you on this one." The use, like that of the phrase "this one," in England always means a delay but leaves the door open, as in, "I'll have to see the managing director about this one," and "think it over" means that the sales pitch has not worked. The broker was still affable. "Yes, do so by all means, but remember they come and go. In fact, there is only one ducal title on the books at the moment, and it may sell at any time. Dukedom of Almendra Dulce, in fact very old, but I'll give you an idea of how it works." How it worked was a revelation to me. Many continental titles, Fitzgilbert told us, can pass down only to legal heirs. But a legal heir includes an adopted son. Find a penniless duke or whatever, have him adopt you legally, no matter your age, and presto, was how Mr. Fitzgilbert put it. And I get into the Almanach de Gotha. Issa had done his homework, up to a point. I decided not to complicate matters by airing my knowledge that the Almanac, though authoritative, was not comprehensive. You can be out of it and still titled. It did not list the Spanish nobility and ceased publication during the Second World War. "I guarantee it." "But," I asked, still trying to recover after the recent snub, "how can people respect someone who has simply been adopted and is not the blood of the noble duke or whatever?" Fitzgilbert gave me a pitying smile. "Would you, sir, dare to suggest that a man of rank would actually adopt anyone whom he did not feel to be worthy to inherit his title? Or better put, would you dare to suggest such a thing and imperil the whole structure of Western nobility?" "No, I suppose not," I had to admit. "I'll just jot down those prices, I mean honoraria," he said, and pushed a piece of paper over to us. "I would have liked an English title," Issa said. Fitzgilbert frowned. Instantly I recalled a passage in Herr Kurt von Stutterheim's Those English, in which he deals with an Englishman's change of mood if affability does not have the desired effect. If he sees that all his blandishments are failing, says this otherwise admiring Teuton, the polite and kindly Englishman is capable of becoming in the twinkling of an eye one of the harshest people imaginable. Von Stutterheim had spent 15 years in England studying the natives. It was evidently one of his really tough customers with whom he had to deal today. Something harsh was coming up. "Look," said Fitzgilbert, sitting bolt upright and fixing Issa with a basilisk stare, You're not exactly first 11, are you, old son? First 11? Yes, you're, well, foreign, aren't you yourself? Let's face it. Now Issa produced his googly, clearly designed to skittle both me and Fitzgilbert. People keep saying things like, you shouldn't have a double-barreled name, and you shouldn't have a foreign name. Very well. How about Prince Philip? I have cuttings from the English papers which call him formerly surnamed Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Glucksburg. I said, Schleswig-Holstein is a magic word in Britain. It is the Angles' ancestral land. Look it up in any book. It crops up all the time. Fitzgilbert nodded. And, I continued, only some hyphenated names are shotgun ones. The title broker smiled. As for the Sonderburg-Glucksburg part, he intoned, that's subsidiary. Philip changed his name to Mountbatten, a direct translation from Battenberg, and you'd better not feel that you know better than royalty, old lad. Yes, I said to myself, he's English all right, got an answer to everything. I wonder what he changed his name from. Issa was trying to fight back. I don't just want to be British, I want to be English. In our country, of course, Britannia isn't disliked so much as Inglesi, but in for a penny and you can run with the hare and the hounds, as you say over here. Fitzgilbert winced. Nobody can become English. You have to be born here for that. Get that straight right away, he said. The Lebanese winked and touched the side of his nose with his forefinger. Mediterranean or Central Europe born no good, eh? He was smiling, and I sensed that he had got Fitzgilbert onto the killing ground. I knew that look from many a Levantine game of chess. That's right. So, said Issa triumphantly, Prince Philip, born in Corfu, Greece, as your gossip columns keep telling us, is not English? All the members of the House of Lords who are German immigrants are not English? I, Issa bin Abdullah al-Nazrani, cannot become English? Fitzgilbert capitulated. All right then, you can, but that has nothing to do with titles. Issa dug me in the ribs delightedly. Did you hear that? Best of British luck to you, was all I could think of at such short notice. Issa was in a good mood. He tipped the lift man as we left, having kissed the reluctant hand of Fitzgilbert's receptionist. Yes, I think I'll have one of those, murmured Issa bin Abdullah as we passed through the simulated marble entrance hall on our way to the street. I felt a drumming in my head. Fitzgilbert was an Englishman and we were in England, so our experiences would be a valid part of my book. But buying a title? It was positively un-English. After all, you could not even buy English baronetcies anymore. Was Issa going about things in the right way? Do the English approve of shortcuts? The drumming got louder. It's those damned drums, Issa, I gasped. Soon the natives will be restless. But he was not listening. He was repeating to himself, His Grace, Mr. Issa Bartholomew Chumley, Duke of Almendra Dulce. I just didn't have the heart to tell him how another foreigner, with far greater chances than his, had been driven to distraction by English ways and had felt himself compelled to fall back on one of his German titles. A monarch, no less. But I rang up Fitzgilbert and told him. The tale concerns King George III, who heard that a certain English gentleman would not take an oath of allegiance to him, or even allow him to be named as king in his presence. After all, such people as James Hogg had composed ditties which were sung in the streets. This one, though in Anglo-Saxon Scottish, was much quoted by English people in George III's time. Wha the deil ha we gotten for a king, but a wee German lady, and when we gaed to bring him, he was delving in his kail yerdie. The German king of the English had, however, absorbed at least something of the mentality of his new people. He had soon learned how to give backhanded compliments. He said, Carry my compliments to him and say that I respect his steadiness of principles, or as he may not receive my compliments as King of England, present them as those of the Elector of Hanover. Fitzgilbert, delighted, asked for the name of a book where this anecdote was to be found and the page number. Then he said, "Love it. This should help shift a Jerry title or two." He was so pleased that I shared a new piece of information with him. I had found it in the Oxford Dictionary of English Christian Names. It is indeed by no means clear what in England a man's name legally is, whether there is such a thing as a legal name. He found that very interesting. As the Afghans say, an owl is known by its hoot and a wolf by its howl. Isa went away and thought over the question of names, titles, and Anglification, thanking me for my trouble. 3 months later, I received an invitation to a party from a baron. As I shook my host's hand, I asked, "How did you do it, Isa?" "Quite easy, really," said Abdullah. "I discovered that there is no obstacle to your changing your name to Baron in this country, so I did it by deed poll. Much cheaper than that dreadful lawyer and the de Gilbert or whoever he was, the title broker." "Baron Isa," I said. "Yes, it sounds good. But Isa Baron Fordham Leighton, what made you choose that name?" "Easy enough when you know how," he grinned. "I went to the title and found a reliable book from Oxford. They must know what they're talking about. It is called the Oxford Dictionary of English Proverbs, and I found this in it, on page 280, in case you feel tempted to anglify. In Ford, in Ham, in Lay, and Ton, the most of English surnames run. So I just ran them together. Ford, Ham, Lay, Ton. It is simple, my friend, as the English say, when you know how." This audio is made available by the Idries Shah Foundation and is copyright 2019. All rights reserved.